Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 140, and I want to talk about the infighting among libertarians. Um, so, there are, of course, certain personalities that I follow and very much enjoy, but there's also a lot of fighting, even among people that, for various reasons I like. And so it kind of a little bit of a downer when you see them fighting with each other, especially when supposedly they're supposed to be on the same team, quote unquote, right? Same side of things, uh, supposedly the same political outlook on life, especially when it comes to politics. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, it's a big umbrella. People who are in favor of freedom, well, they may self-identify as subscribing to the non-aggression principle, voluntarism, anarco-capitalism, libertarian, pro-free market, pro-freedom, agorism. There are lots of ways that people are going to self-identify. And I'm sure there are many other ways that people are going to self-identify that are pro-freedom, except of course anarco-communism. That's not freedom. But in any case, uh, supposedly it's all about freedom until there's a disagreement, right? Until their opinions diverge, and then now they're fighting over legislation, how things should be, um, what would be the correct way of going about doing things, and it becomes an argument. I'm saying that whenever there is a disagreement of this sort, you just got to have the realization that there should be no legislation regarding this matter. Okay. So if people are going to disagree, no, it should be this way, no, it should be that way. Well, that's a clear sign that we as a society don't really know. And there's so much misinformation, bad information, subsidized information out there that we don't really know what is, in fact, the best solution, the best way of going about things. I'm going to have an episode about sex, but I want to set it up by going over this first, right? So when you start arguing over legislation or what legislation we need in place, that's when you got to realize that you've lost the plot, right? You've lost your way. You've forgotten what and why we're doing and saying the things that we're doing and saying. It doesn't matter at this point who wins or who wins the argument or whose position is accepted as being the position we're going to adopt moving forward, because what you've done is you've created dividing lines and destroyed the chance of unity. I mean, a lot of people will have a bad taste in their mouth. It's going to look bad to outsiders. um, yeah, and it just sort of takes the wind out of your sails, kind of thing. So instead of having to come with a definitive decision on which side you're going to take within the smaller political framework, uh, political philosophy, you just leave it alone. And I think the Mises Caucus tried to do this, but it was rejected because other people wanted more legislation, wanted more moral positioning, and that is just simply not the way to go, right? Allowing more people to do their own thing rather than saying all of us agree to all of these things. It's a non-starter. It will never work, because what you're basically saying is, going back to the episode where I said the perfect political candidate is you, right? Not everyone is going to see things in the same way. And it is impossible to have many, many people, many thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of people all agree with the same long list of moral positions. It's just not going to happen. So what we have to do, where's the solution? We have to go back to the free market, right? This is what we supposedly all trust and believe as being the bedrock and the method through which we can find what are the best solutions. So we got to go back to the free market. People have to remember, especially libertarians, that it's with freedom and choice, and then also taking responsibility for our choices. In other words, each person has to pay for their choices, that you will discover the best moral position, right? The morality discovery that I've been harping on for the last few episodes, right? So it's with freedom and people being required to pay for those choices and also to pay for the consequences of those choices that the best moral position, moral course will appear. At the same time, people who choose a more expensive way of doing things, they can have their way of life as well. It's sort of like the hand loom versus machines making your clothing. So in Milton Friedman's Free to Choose videos, when he looks at what happens to a society where they experience industrial revolution, only the best of the hand loom operators, only the best businesses that make the best quality hand loom products are going to survive. Everybody else is going to go bankrupt in the face of automated looms. And so the same is true in the free market when it comes to moral positions, right? You'll have your dominant moral positions, but there's still room for everyone else who wants to take a different position when it comes to certain moral beliefs. I'm going to have an example in a moment. So, why is this important to remember? Because while people who are pro freedom are fighting with each other, there is a continuous movement among special interest groups to take advantage of centralized power. In other words, while we're sitting here fighting over our sort of in the broad scheme of things, minor moral positioning, right? You're going to have all of these corrupt, uh, subjective special interest groups trying to take advantage of all of the centralized power that already exists in the society that we in which we live. And so we have to learn how to let it go. It's so unfortunate that that movie, I forget what it was, Frozen, uh, where the song was Let It Go. And so every time I would say that in class, people would start singing that song. It was very distracting. Nevertheless, people have to learn to just simply let it go. And I know it's not easy, but if you want to keep the big picture in mind, you got to let it go. And best of all, it is still consistent with the perspective of freedom. So whether libertarians or however else you want to call them, but anarco-capitalists, I would stick in the big umbrella of libertarian. If they were to ever get any kind of traction, the wheels of corruption continue to turn. No one really cares, which kind of libertarian has risen to power within the Libertarian Party. No one really cares outside of the Libertarian Party because the wheels of corruption continue to turn. And the urgency and the problem, the mountain of problems that we have to sort of tackle just simply get bigger and bigger. In other words, the ship is sinking while we're fighting amongst ourselves and no one cares. So we have to always remember the bigger picture, that there are bigger fish to fry instead of trying to fry each other, with all the shenanigans that people engage in. We have to sort of keep the big picture in mind. And if we do take this free market approach, even to our own political positionings within this sort of broad umbrella of libertarianism, pro freedom, small government, republicanism, whatever you want to call it, um, we let private arbitration work out a lot of the details, right? So I know that a lot of people have certain positions which they feel very, very strongly about. Well, you got to let private arbitration take care of that. And the more that we develop a framework of private arbitration, it will make more sense. Let's take Christianity as an example. Okay. And I know a lot of people are going to give me shade for this because either you're an atheist or you are a Christian and you reject the current state of Christianity. But just as a out, taking this sort of big picture approach, because obviously I have my own opinion, but yet I still function within this big um, tent that people call Christianity. And believe me, the tent has been made a lot bigger than some people would suppose. But in any case, there are so many iterations, so many different expressions of Christian faith. And we're just talking about the United States, right? So once you think globally, I mean, there are countless expressions of Christian faith. Um, and even if we just look at the United States over the history of this young country, you'll see that because of religious freedom, you may be sitting in a church and you might not like what you're hearing, so you leave that church, right? You have that option. It's not like this church is the same as every other church, as in a state church situation. But if you don't like what is being taught at that particular church, you just find another one. And if you can't find any, you make your own, right? You can say, I am my own church. A lot of people do that. And they say things like, I believe in spirituality, not religion, things like that. But what you're doing is you're creating your own approach to life. And because we have religious freedom, you can do that. Um, I, as a Korean, and Koreans love, seizing on an entrepreneurial opportunity. I've seen pastors where they want to be, the chairman of the denomination or the presbytery or the synod or whatever you want to call it. So what they do is they break away and they make their own denomination so they can be chairman, for another year instead of having to wait their turn, having to wait 30 years for the turn for another opportunity to come up. And so they want the opportunity to come around frequently. So you start up a breakaway denomination, which only has a handful of pastors. You don't care about growth, but you just care about, being the chairman more frequently. And so even that happens, and if you're into that, then you're going to say, ooh, that's a great idea. And if you're not into that, then you say, yeah, I'm not going to participate in that. But everyone gets what they want, and you let the chips fall where they fall. You let them lay where they fall. Okay. Keeping also in mind that certain periods of time will favor certain kinds of teaching and interpretation. So times of prosperity will favor prosperity gospel, right? Um, and then times of hardship might be more favorable for other kinds of churches in that they survive, right? It's not that they're going to increase in membership so much, but they'll survive. So, for example, persecution for faith. And my father lived in Korea during the Japanese occupation of Korea. And he lived through the period of time when persecution of the church became formalized. And so anyone who went to church, you were beaten, your pastor was arrested, etc. Unless, of course, you, gave your loyalty to the Japanese God. You did Shinto worship first, and then you had your church service. Then you were left alone. But those who said, no, that's idolatry, we're not going to do it, well, they were arrested, right? So certain churches prospered for different reasons. And depending on how your interpretation of the faith was going to be, that determined what church you go to. And so different situations will then allow people to clearly state what it is they actually believe. So the problem arises, whether it's in Christianity or in general society, when we prioritize growth, right? When you prioritize membership, then you have to appeal to something, right? You have to have a tagline, whether it's gay marriage, abortion, whatever, right? You're going to try to, because people these days are so simple. They're so, not very well read. Their sources of information are very narrow. And so you try to make things simple to get people to get their attention and maybe perhaps join. But as soon as you do that, you have to make compromises. And now we're back to fighting again. So whenever there is a debate and a fight over what we should do, what position should we take, should we legislate this? Should we make this a plank of our party? That's the sign for people to leave it up to the individual. In other words, to just leave it to freedom, right? Allow people to do and practice what it is that they want. And then if it becomes a problem for a person, then you let arbitration take over, right? And so instead of saying everyone must believe the same thing, you leave it to freedom, and then there are consequences. And when the consequences are extremely damaging, that's when you have arbitration to work out the details for those individual parties. And over time, you begin to see, oh, how do things usually play out in this kind of situation? And we'll see an organic growth into what is moral. In other words, we have to trust the system of freedom, of the free market, to help us, to guide us, and to figure out how we should resolve any kind of conflict and tension. Ron Paul showed us. He's the one that sort of is that example. That he staked out a principle. This is the principle. And then everyone who identifies with the principle and realizes that within the principle, they can still do what they want, they gravitate to him, right? He didn't reach out or target a certain demographic. He just simply laid out his principle. And then people who identify with the principle, and there are a lot, because it was very, very broad, it was very, very freedom focused. And so he attracted a lot of attention when the membership and support of other more traditional political approaches were flagging, right? He was growing. It was exciting. So if we were to look at an extreme political application of what I just said, in communism, there's no room for competing opinions, right? So once you establish what is the right way, there's no room for anything else. So in that kind of restricted environment, you have to lie a lot, right? You make a lot of false promises, make a lot of false guarantees. And when it is revealed that you can't follow through on those promises, well, you lie again. And that's our current political situation. But in the free market, there's room for everybody. Everyone gets to do what they want. They get to believe what they want, but they have to pay for it. And so let's go back to that sort of cliche example. So if I want to murder someone, then I'm free to do that. No, obviously, because there are consequences to that. There's the family of the people that you killed. And so then we throw that into arbitration, right? And so the justice system will be presided over by private courts. And so we have to opt for freedom. We say we believe in freedom. So trust in freedom, right? Allow people, give people that freedom to make those choices. And over time, as we see the consequences and the costs of those choices, we will see what the more favored moral positions will be and what are the less popular moral positions. And then people get to then make their choice accordingly. So there's no need for legislation. There's no need for us to tell people what they can and cannot do. And yeah, for me, that includes issues like gay marriage, abortion, all of these things, because the more that we get our noses out of other people's businesses, you will see that certain behaviors, which really are not very favorable, will decline because it turns out they are not very moral. So I trust that system. And so it'd be nice if more and more people would adopt this as their approach, their outlook, to trust freedom. That's it for today. I don't know, maybe you already knew this, but hopefully it'll just be a position that would be more popular as we move forward. Talk to you next time.